U.S. signals intelligence has intercepted and decrypted communications, confirming a high-ranking national security official inside a linchpin Gulf monarchy is a long-term, paid asset of Iran's Ministry of Intelligence. Is the entire U.S. security architecture in the Persian Gulf now compromised? And how can the White House respond without shattering the most critical anti-Iran alliance in the world? The intelligence is considered definitive. It is not from a single source. A mosaic of SIGINT, HUMINT, and IMENT data, collected over a period of 7 months, has been cross-referenced and verified by at least 3 separate allied intelligence agencies, including the National Security Agency and Israel's Mossad. The conclusion is inescapable. A mole, codenamed Korban by his Iranian handlers, has been operating at the highest echelons of a nation that hosts multiple, indispensable U.S. military installations. Korban is not a low-level functionary. The official holds a portfolio that grants them direct access to shared intelligence streams, joint operational planning, and, most critically, the technical specifications and deployment schedules of U.S.-supplied missile defense systems. For at least 5 years, and possibly as long as a decade, sensitive data concerning U.S. force posture, naval patrol routes, drone flight paths, and the vulnerabilities of regional air defense networks has been systematically funneled to Tehran. The breach is catastrophic. It is a strategic disaster of the highest order. The initial discovery was accidental, a byproduct of routine surveillance targeting Iranian diplomatic channels. A pattern of anomalous encrypted data bursts, originating from a secure government network within the allied state and terminating at a known Ministry of Intelligence server farm in Tehran, triggered an automated flag. The bursts were small, measured in kilobytes, and hidden within legitimate diplomatic traffic, a needle in a digital haystack. It took NSA cyber warfare specialists weeks of dedicated work to isolate and crack the first layer of encryption. What they found was a report. It was a detailed after-action review of a recent joint U.S. allied naval exercise in the Strait of Hormuz. The report contained information that could only have come from the allied nation's Naval Operations Center, including the exact radar frequencies used by U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and the planned response protocols to simulated swarming attacks by Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps fastboats. The leak was fresh, less than 72 hours old. An intelligence emergency was declared. The hunt for the source began. This is a betrayal that recalibrates the balance of power in the Middle East. For years, the United States has built a security framework in the Gulf based on a doctrine of technological superiority and trusted partnerships. Billions of dollars in advanced weaponry, from F-35 fighter jets to terminal high-altitude area defense systems, have been sold to these partners. The core assumption was a shared threat perception focused on Iran. That assumption has now been invalidated. Tehran did not need to defeat the system. It simply bought a key to the front door. Rehook. The implications extend far beyond military strategy. For global energy markets, this raises a terrifying question. Is the defensive shield protecting nearly a third of the world's seaborne oil supply fundamentally flawed? The compromised data includes the specific performance envelopes and blind spots of the very radar systems designed to detect and intercept Iranian missile and drone attacks targeting oil tankers and production facilities. The price of Brent crude could surge by double-digit percentages on this news alone. The global economy is now exposed. The investigation, codenamed Operation Blind Trust, focused on a shortlist of 27 officials who had access to all the data points contained in the initial leaked file. Using advanced social network analysis and cross-referencing financial records obtained through allied intelligence channels, the list was narrowed to 3 individuals. A dedicated team from the CIA's Special Activities Center was dispatched to the allied capital, operating under diplomatic cover, to conduct discreet, close-target surveillance. It was this human intelligence on the ground that provided the final, damning piece of the puzzle. One of the 3 targets, the official now identified as Korban, was observed using a clandestine communication protocol, a sequence of seemingly innocuous actions in a public space that signaled his readiness to receive instructions from his handlers. The signal was observed, and within hours, a corresponding encrypted message was sent from a known IRGC cyber espionage unit to a burner device Korban was known to possess. The loop was closed. The asset was confirmed. The profile of Korban is a classic study in espionage recruitment. A senior figure, respected but perceived as having been passed over for the highest positions of power. Financial records reveal a series of unexplained wealth transfers, funneled through shell corporations in Malaysia and Cyprus, totaling an estimated $4.5 million over 8 years. The motivation appears to be a common cocktail of greed and resentment, expertly exploited by Iranian case officers who cultivated him for years before his activation. He did not sell his country's secrets out of ideology. He sold them for cash. The damage assessment currently being conducted at the Pentagon and Langley is grim. The compromised data falls into 3 critical categories. First, defense systems. Iran now possesses detailed knowledge of the command and control links, sensor capabilities, and potential vulnerabilities of Patriot and THAAD batteries deployed across the peninsula. They know the system's saturation points, the exact number of incoming projectiles required to overwhelm it. This turns a defensive shield into a predictable algorithm for Iranian war planners. Second, basing rights and force protection. KORBAN had access to the full structural plans and security protocols for U.S. facilities in the region. This includes the location of command bunkers, ammunition depots, fuel stores, and personnel dormitories. In a direct conflict, this information would allow Iran to bypass perimeter defenses and target critical infrastructure with devastating precision, maximizing casualties, and crippling the U.S. ability to project power from these forward operating bases. Every U.S. soldier, sailor, and airman stationed in the country is now at an elevated risk. Rehook. This raises an immediate and personal question for tens of thousands of American service members and their families. What does it mean when the host nation charged with your security has been secretly collaborating with your primary adversary? The established protocols for force protection, the intelligence sharing, the joint patrols, all of it is now suspect. The White House must now consider the possibility that its own troops are stationed in a strategic trap, where their protectors could also be their observers. The third category of compromised data is the most strategically damaging. Shared intelligence on Iranian covert operations. For years, the U.S. and its Gulf partners have collaborated to track and disrupt Iranian arms smuggling to Houthi rebels in Yemen, proxy militias in Iraq, and Hezbollah cells throughout the region. KORBAN had access to this shared intelligence pool. This means that for years, Iran has likely been forewarned about raids, surveillance operations, and the identities of local informants. U.S. and allied counterterrorism operations have been failing not because of poor execution, but because they were betrayed before they even began. This revelation forces a complete re-evaluation of recent history in the region. The unexplained operational failures, the unlucky ambushes of Allied patrols, the uncanny ability of Iranian-backed militias to evade capture, all now points back to this single high-level penetration. The United States has been fighting an enemy that was reading its playbook. The scale of the deception is breathtaking, suggesting a level of sophistication from Iran's Ministry of Intelligence that many in the West had previously underestimated. The dilemma now facing the U.S. president is almost impossible. There are 2 primary courses of action, each with potentially catastrophic consequences. Option 1 is direct confrontation. The president could present the decrypted communications and surveillance evidence directly to the leadership of the allied nation. This would force them to arrest KORBAN and publicly acknowledge the breach. While this would neutralize the immediate threat, it would also cause an irreparable diplomatic rupture. Publicly exposing the mole would humiliate the allied government, shattering the image of strength and competence it projects to its own people and to the region. It would sow deep distrust, making future intelligence sharing and military cooperation nearly impossible. Rival Gulf states would see it as a sign of weakness, and Iran would score an immeasurable propaganda victory, proving it can penetrate the inner sanctum of America's closest partners. The alliance, the bedrock of U.S. policy in the Gulf for 40 years, could crumble in a matter of days. Option 2 is containment. The White House could choose not to inform the allied government, attempting to manage the breach covertly. This would involve quietly walling off KORBAN from sensitive information, feeding him disinformation to mislead his Iranian handlers, and using the knowledge of his existence as leverage. This approach would preserve the critical strategic alliance on the surface. But the risks are immense. Operating blind is a dangerous gamble. The U.S. would never be certain if KORBAN has accomplices. They would have to assume that any information shared with the ally is compromised, effectively neutering the partnership anyway. It would mean continuing to station thousands of U.S. troops and billions of dollars in military hardware in a country where a known hostile asset operates with impunity. It's a strategy that trades a sudden, public crisis for a slow, festering poison at the heart of the relationship. The latest intercept, received just 1 hour ago, indicates the asset has been activated for a new, time-sensitive operation. Their target: the complete schematic of the U.S. Aegis Ashore missile defense system currently being installed in the country. And its loss would be incalculable. Unlike mobile systems, Aegis Ashore is a fixed, strategic asset. Its schematics would give Iran a permanent blueprint to defeat the very system designed to neutralize its ballistic missile threat, effectively handing them the keys to nuclear blackmail across the entire region. The president was about to authorize a high-risk special operations mission to neutralize K-Orban before the transfer could be completed. But then, a junior analyst at the NSA, re-examining the oldest K-Orban intercepts with a new decryption algorithm, found something buried in the metadata. A ghost transmission. It was a secondary communication, piggybacked on the main signal to KORBAN's handler, a routing instruction sent just milliseconds after the primary data burst. Rehook. For weeks they couldn't trace it, but a cross-reference against a completely separate intelligence program, one monitoring the internal communications of the Allied nations' royal family, produced a match. The signal wasn't just going to Iran. A confirmation receipt was being sent to a server located inside the royal palace itself. The implications of this are earth-shattering. This wasn't a secret betrayal by a lone actor. It suggests the Allied leadership knew. This entire time, the U.S. has been operating on the assumption of a simple penetration. But what if it's a sanctioned conspiracy? Why would a nation, protected by the American military umbrella, actively participate in handing its own defense secrets to its mortal enemy? Is this a desperate attempt to appease Tehran? A double game to play the superpowers against each other? Or is it something even Washington can't comprehend? A strategic realignment that is turning the entire region on its head, with U.S. assets and personnel caught directly in the middle? The dilemma is no longer just about a mole. It's about the fidelity of an entire alliance. The order to neutralize K-Orban was rescinded just minutes before launch. The White House was no longer dealing with a traitor. It was facing a state-sanctioned strategy. To strike Korban now wouldn't just be an assassination. It would be an act of war against the very nation U.S. forces were sworn to protect. The Aegis schematics were still in play, the clock still ticking down to a catastrophic security failure. Trapped, with no military or diplomatic options left, the president chose a third path. Not a missile, but a message. A direct, encrypted call was placed not to the Allied nation's intelligence chief, but to the personal line of the aging king himself. There were no threats, no accusations, just a single, cold, precisely worded statement, conveying that the United States was now aware of the secondary routing instruction. The ghost transmission. 1 hour later, the NSA confirmed the data transfer from K-Orban had been remotely terminated. The Aegis schematics were safe. For now, a crisis was averted, but a far greater one had just begun. There would be no public fallout, no diplomatic incident. The king would never acknowledge the call. K-Orban would likely be quietly reassigned, his betrayal swept under the rug. The alliance would continue on paper, a hollowed-out shell maintained for public consumption. From this moment on, every piece of shared intelligence, every joint military exercise, every public statement of partnership is a lie. The United States is now knowingly allied with a government that conspired with its worst enemy to steal its most sensitive defense secrets. The Aegis system is protected, but it now defends a partner who cannot be trusted, in a region where the lines between friend and foe have evaporated into a dangerous mirage. This is the new reality of 21st century conflict. It's a world not of grand armies, but of ghost transmissions. Not of clear enemies, but of compromised allies playing a deadly double game. Understanding these shadow wars is no longer optional. It's essential for survival. The stories that will define our future are being written right now in encrypted code and silent betrayals. To see the patterns before they become headlines, make sure you subscribe to global_crisis_radar.